Chapter 5. They could feel the earth shake even through the vehicles as they drove. Dark beams glowed in the distance. Smoke billowed up from buildings on the horizon. Huge chunks of earth flew up into the sky and then thudded against the ground. There was no doubt Abaddon had made it to the healing shrine. A cutting beam flew toward them, and both vehicles swerved in opposite directions as the road was torn apart. Row 82's vehicle tipped onto two wheels. He struggled to straighten it out, but he knew after only a moment that the force that ripped the asphalt apart could not be overcome by clever steering at acceleration. The vehicle rolled and began bouncing against the rocky terrain on the shoulder of the road. Eventually, the upside-down vehicle slid into the thick trunk of a pine tree. "Is everyone okay?" shouted Sig as he freed himself from his seat belt and slid down onto the roof. "We need to get out of here," said Lucas, who appeared unhurt. He squeezed out of the broken window nearest to him. Sig kicked out his door and wiggled himself out before rushing to the back door to try and help the others. Row 82 had hit his head and was unconscious. Jonathan had put himself in front of Kirana protectively, and she was trying to wake him. Sig disconnected the seatbelt around Jonathan and pulled him over his shoulder. "Idiot," whispered Kirana. She was unable to hide the concern in her voice, and Sig smiled as he set Jonathan down. Kirana freed herself and went to Jonathan's side. Lizard teleported out and freed Row 82. As soon as he had been pulled free, the weight of the vehicle crunched the roof. "That was close," said Lizard with air quotes as he looked back at the crushed vehicle. The squeal of tires and the shatter of glass distracted him. "That had to be the others," Lucas called. "Can we find out if Victor is okay?" Sig asked in Lizard's direction. "Jonathan may need him here." Lizard nodded and teleported away. Lizard gasped as he appeared. The other vehicle was teetering on the edge of a precipice. Large sections of the ground that had supported the section of road on which the vehicle was resting had been vaporized by the destroyer's cutting beams. Small pieces of asphalt crumbled free from the disintegrating chunk of pavement that dangled above the 100-foot drop. The power of the destroyer's beams was unfathomable, and had Lizard not been so worried about his friends, he would have been impressed with their opponent's ability to create massive holes in anything so casually. As it was, he found himself paralyzed with indecision. If he were to teleport to the vehicle, his own weight might cause what was left of the road to fall apart. After a brief hesitation, he decided he could not simply stand and watch. He teleported to the frail ledge and tore open the door. The ground began to give way and the vehicle slid forward. Lizard tried to yank it back, but it dragged him along instead as it plummeted down into the darkness below. "Lizard!" shouted Jennifer. To Lizard's surprise, the voice was not coming from within the vehicle. He looked back in and realized that it had already been evacuated. He looked back up. Jennifer must have used her ability to pull everyone out of the vehicle. He teleported up to the top. 2 seconds later, the vehicle crashed at the bottom of the chasm. "I was worried you hadn't made it," said Lizard with air quotes. Jennifer smiled. "I wasn't late this time," she said. Victor was tending to Erica, who had a bruise on her arm. Stephanie was rubbing her neck, but she appeared to be unhurt. It took a few minutes for them to join the others. Stephanie watched Erica closely to ensure she was keeping an eye on Jennifer. Stephanie felt a bit more relaxed when she noticed that Erica was doing just as she wanted. She was ready to bear the burden by herself. Her conversation with Erica had given her the courage to pay whatever price was required of her to save her friends. "We need to get over there," said Sig impatiently. He did not like seeing the destruction that was being unleashed on the hospital. "Yes," agreed Jennifer with a frown. "The Heaven Shield key will be down there, and we will probably need it." They began to make their way toward the source of the destruction. As they got closer, they passed others that were fleeing. Women clutching crying children rushed away from the ruins of the shrine. The fear that they wore on their faces was only interrupted by brief expressions of confusion as they saw the strange group of key-bearers walk toward the destruction. A few of them recognized Erica and Jennifer, but not even the sight of a key-bearer was enough to convince them that victory was possible against the enemy they had seen. Lucas noticed the wide eyes and trembling limbs of these frightened people as he passed them. Tales of the destroyer that he had heard likely started in this moment, as helpless victims fled from an unstoppable, malevolent force. Each expression of fear, of doubt, or of panic seemed to infuse the group with determination. Daniel Young had become more than a traitor, more than an infiltrator, more than a manipulative opportunist. He had become their goal. They had to stop him. The sky seemed to grow darker as they approached. The billowing smoke grew thick, and ashes rained down around them. Sirens and alarms blared from the capsized vehicles on the sides of the broken road. The earth shook as a building crumbled into concrete chunks. The more horrific the scene got, the quicker the pace that Jennifer set as she rushed forward. She had been helpless the last time she had confronted Abaddon here, but she was determined to beat him this time. Victor clenched his fists as he saw the destruction. The healing shrine had been a hospital. Perhaps it was the influence of the Heaven's Breath key, but seeing it transformed into a mass grave seemed almost sacrilegious. He felt more contempt for Abaddon with every step he took. Lucas shook his head with sorrow. Daniel Young had been a benevolent mentor. He had always been so careful with life. Now he was brazenly destroying it in a senseless rampage. Not only were the random, unfortunate citizens his victims, but also his own ancestor, Timothy Young. Lucas wondered what could have possessed him to fall so far. Kirana stood next to Jonathan. She was still upset with him for having risked his life to defend her, but she fought her impulse to distance herself from him. She felt a mixture of guilt for reinforcing his risky defense, and of safety that he would not allow anything to hurt her. The confusion made her uncomfortable, but she knew it would be equally uncomfortable to be away from him. Jonathan felt awkward as he walked next to Kirana. He knew that she was angry with him for trying to defend her, but he could not help himself. He turned back and looked awkwardly at Stephanie, but she was not paying attention. There was no one with whom he could talk about his feelings, and he decided with all the tragedy around them that it was probably inappropriate for him to be worrying about his feelings anyway. The group came towards a mother clutching a baby while screaming for help. Sig rushed up to her immediately. "My other son is trapped," she screamed as tears poured down her face. "I can't get him out." Sig looked at the building next to which the woman was standing, and his eyes grew wide. The structure was swaying slightly in the breeze, and it looked as though it could collapse at any moment. It reminded him of the ruined buildings outside New California in his own time. Only in his time, people knew to keep away from unstable walls. The people of this age were completely unprepared for the perils of the destroyer. "How is he trapped?" asked Sig calmly. "The door to our apartment got blocked by rubble while I was trying to get my baby out," she said as she sobbed. "Number 14. "Rubble removal is my specialty," said Sig with a wide smile as he put his hand reassuringly on the woman's shoulder. "Be careful, Sig," said Lucas. "The building could come down at any moment." Sig laughed as he rushed inside. It was not long before he found the apartment to which the panicked mother had referred. The numerals 1-4 were nailed to the door that was stuck open, but the doorway was heaped with debris. Sig gripped the side of a large concrete chunk that seemed to be weighing most of the rubble down and yanked it off the heap. As soon as it was off, he heard the sobbing of a small boy inside. "Take it easy, kid," shouted Sig. "I'm going to get you out of here and back to your mom." He moved quickly as he pulled rubble out from the doorway and noticed that the boy's leg was stuck underneath a large chunk of concrete. "This may hurt a bit, but I've got to get that off of your leg," said Sig. He grunted with effort as he slowly lifted the massive concrete chunk up and pushed it to the side. He quickly scooped up the boy and sprinted out. "Victor!" shouted Sig. "He's got a broken leg." The moment he emerged with the boy from the building, it collapsed behind them. A cloud of dust blew out of the entryway as the building crumbled. The dust stuck to the tears on the mother's cheeks as she rushed to embrace the boy. "This may hurt a bit," said Victor as he took his key in his hand. The mother's eyes grew wide. "I thought that was Timothy Young's key," she whispered with amazement. "Can you heal his leg? Who are you?" "His name is Victor, and who he is kind of complicated," said Sig with a wide smile. The boy winced for a moment as Victor touched his leg. He cried out briefly in pain, but then stopped. "You should be all right," said Victor with a smile as his eyes stopped glowing. "Well, Victor, you saved my son." "Thank you," said the mother gratefully. "Well, stay safe," said Sig with a wide smile. "Get away from here if you can." "We will," said the woman as the boy rushed up and hugged her leg. "Thank you," said the boy in a small voice as he looked up at Sig. He smiled and waved. "Stay close to your mom, kid," said Sig. Erica crept up to Kirana and pointed to Sig. "Did you see that?" asked Erica. "No hesitation, not a moment of worry for what might happen to him." "I know," said Kirana softly. There was a touch of admiration in her voice. "Sig has always been like that. It goes for matters of the heart, too," said Erica as she looked back at Jonathan. Kirana blushed and turned away. "Promise me that you won't delay too long," whispered Erica. After an awkward moment, Kirana nodded. "Fine," she said. "Say the words," said Erica angrily. "I promise," said Kirana. Her face was bright red. Stephanie could not make out the words that Erica was whispering to Kirana, but she did notice the glance toward Jonathan and Kirana's subsequent blush. She bit her lip for a moment, but shook her head and took a deep breath. She was determined that nothing would throw her off balance this time. Row 82 approached Sig as the group began moving again. "Why did you do that?" he whispered. "Your life is more important than that of a child that will likely die of starvation." "No, it's not," said Sig with a soft smile. "But you have an important role to play in the battle with the destroyer," said Row 82. "That child is nothing." "Part of finding redemption is putting the needs of others above your own needs," said Sig. "We aren't just a group of people trying to make a case for why we're the best. We're trying to make everything better. But one small child is not enough to make circumstances significantly better," said Row 82. "We passed many people that were screaming not for help, but out of mourning for those they lost. That child's salvation provides nothing for those that have lost their own." "But it made a huge difference for the boy and his mother," said Sig with a smile. "It is true that we can't save everyone or do everything to make a difference to everyone, but I am determined to do what I can." Row 82 flexed the metal plates around his ears as he thought about Sig's words. Sig laughed and slapped him on the back. "Don't worry," said Sig. "You will get it." Sig's voice grew soft and his eyes grew wide with sincerity. The intensity of his look made Row 82 feel a bit uncomfortable. He was surprised at his emotion, since he had stood without flinching before some of the most terrifying augments that had ever lived. None of them had provoked emotion the way that Sig did in that moment. "You will find your purpose," said Sig. "You will make a difference." Row 82 smiled involuntarily. Lucas had heard the conversation between Row 82 and Sig. He was consistently amazed by Sig's constant belief in the good of everyone he met. As much as he had enjoyed thwarting Row 82 with radio tricks or other strategies, he found himself hoping that Sig was right. He hoped that Row 82 would change. "We're getting close," said Jennifer as they approached a large ridge. It was familiar to her. She had spoken with Drew Baker on this ridge before he had rushed down to meet the destroyer. She furrowed her brow with determination. The group rushed ahead. The sound of crashing buildings and the frequency of dark beams indicated that a battle was being fought. Both Jennifer and Stephanie knew who it was. It was Drew Baker fighting Abaddon. Jennifer felt a determination to see if she could save Drew this time. She looked back to the others to ensure they weren't watching carefully. She turned ahead and clutched her key, and her eyes began to glow brightly. Everything seemed to slow down to a crawl. She sprinted ahead, knowing that no one would try and stop her. She was certain that this time she would not be late. It was not long before she came to another ledge. She gasped at the sight she beheld. It was the moment in which Drew Baker was being disintegrated, and her past self was moving into the future with the protection of Drew's heavenly shield. She had been too late. She could not save Drew. Tears of regret welled up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Drew," she screamed. She wondered if this was simply another example of fate preventing history from being changed. If that was true, then why were they here at all? Why had they been chosen to bear divine keys? If there was a high power that guided fate, was it malevolent? Why was destiny such a burden? Jennifer wiped her eyes as she thought about everything she had learned. She looked at her former self. Slowly she remembered that she had attempted in that moment to go to the time from where the destroyer had come. It was not long after this moment that she had arrived in the custody of slavers, but she would not remember how she had come there, or for what she was seeking. She would experience only the nagging feeling of being too late. Not long after that, she remembered being rescued by Lizard and a more kindly version of Daniel Young. She remembered seeing Victor Lee for the first time as well. Their quest to find divine keys felt so natural to her. It was as though they were supposed to have them. She remembered Sig's passionate speech about being destined to go back and stop the destroyer. She also remembered how helpless they had felt when Daniel Young had taken on the identity of Abaddon, and in stealing the power of thousands of lives, became the very thing they had wanted to stop. She wondered if it was possible, even with every divine key, to stop such a creature. It seemed to be invulnerable. There was no reason it should not continue sacrificing people and using their life energy to rule the world forever. Suddenly she remembered that she had been to the future, and he had not been there ruling forever. Something must have stopped him. Certainly he had scarred the earth and the moon and every person that was born after his murderous rampage, but he was not present. Perhaps they could defeat him. Jennifer memorized the spot where Drew was and rushed back to her friends. Her eyes stopped glowing as she gasped for breath. Victor caught her before she fell over. "You shouldn't use your power yet," whispered Victor. Jennifer smiled. The sound of concern for her in his voice was genuine. "Sorry," she whispered back. She rubbed her head and stood with renewed confidence. They would beat Abaddon. They would be victorious. "I know where the Heavenly Shield key is, though. We need to get it for Sig." Victor nodded, though it was clear he disapproved of her using her powers excessively. It was not long before they had all arrived at the ledge following Jennifer's lead. Stephanie's eyes grew wide. She looked over at the spot at which she had been in her vision. It was time to signal herself. She had to instill in her past self the confidence to pay the price to save the others. They would need Erica's experience. They would need Jennifer's time manipulation. They would need Victor's healing. They would need Lucas's strategy, Lizard's speed, Row 82's perception, Jonathan's mental focus, Kirana's offensive prowess, and Sig's defensive strength. They would not need a fortune teller. "It's down there," said Jennifer as she pointed to the spot where Drew had been vaporized by Abaddon. Stephanie waved to signal herself in the past and rushed toward Jennifer. This was the moment for which she had prepared. Abaddon at that very moment had become aware of them, and was planting his clawed hands on the ground. He was pumping some kind of dark energy into the earth that radiated toward Jennifer Cedar with the intent to strangle her. Stephanie checked that Victor was several paces away from Jennifer, and hoped that her deception in the car with Erica would pay off. Stephanie sprinted forward and leapt into the air to intercept the attack. Suddenly she felt herself being pushed away. She turned to see Erica smiling at her. Her eyes grew wide with horror. Erica had seen through her lie and intended to take the attack herself. Before Stephanie had fallen to the ground from Erica's shove, the dark cloud of energy flowed up from the ground and began swirling around Erica, suspending her in the air and choking her. It did more than just deprive her of oxygen, though. It ripped the life from her body. Though she had been contorted into an undignified position, she twisted her head around to look at Stephanie once more. If Stephanie could have screamed, she would have. Kirana did. Of course, screaming made no difference, and a moment later, Erica's lifeless body fell to the ground. "Victor!" shouted Kirana. Victor rushed to her and held his key. His eyes began glowing, and he put a hand on Erica's forehead. After a moment, his eyes stopped glowing, and he looked up at Kirana. "There's nothing to heal," said Victor. "She's already gone."